I am live. I am reading out of Eyes of Horus. It is a Joan Marshall Grant far memory book. Joan Marshall Grant was able to remember her incarnations, and she's written 6 books about her far memories. She died in 1989. She was a seer, and she wrote The Winged Pharaoh, which was very famous, and this one was famous too. Eyes of Horus, placed 3,500 years BC. We are now in part 3, and I think it's chapter 5 or 6 of the 3rd part. Chapter 6, Goddess of Women. Not until several months later did I sleep to find myself on the bank of the river. The boat was waiting for me, and as I stepped on board, it put forth on the dark water. Again the mists which obscured the far side curled back to leave a clear channel before the prow. This time no one waited for me in the luminous country beyond. Instead of the avenue of dark trees, there was a wide plain of turf patterned with small flowers, like a mosaic in a floor of malachite. Then I saw a path on whose smooth white surface were the hoof marks of an oryx. I knew that I must follow them, and though I traversed a great distance, there was no sense of time to make me weary. The path led me to a pool of clear water, at which a white oryx was drinking. She lifted her head to watch me as I drew near. I tried to touch her, but she was always just beyond my reach. She pawed at the ground with her forefoot, and I saw that writing signs had appeared in the dust. Though they seemed familiar, I could not read them. The oryx watched me, as though impatient of my stupidity. With all my will I tried to understand what she would say to me. She galloped off, but now it was easy to keep up with her. The sweet grass flowed faster than water under our swift hooves. I no longer ran with clumsy human feet. The wind sang past my curving horns, and scents I had not known before me were vivid to my nostrils. Now she let me approach, and side by side we nibbled the tender shoots of a young thorn bush. She spoke to me. At first I thought you were too proud of being human to relinquish it, even for a little while. Startled, I lifted my head from cropping a new leaf. Instead of the oryx, the girl stood laughing beside me. She said, "What if you forget how to change back again? Shall I have to spend eternity as shepherd to a solitary antelope?" Rahab is a funny name for an antelope. "I'll be very good to you and find a fresh pasture every day, or shall I gild your horns and make a garland to lead you by?" She patted me and then scratched me between my horns. For a moment it was quite pleasant to be an oryx. She laughed. "Poor Rahab, he has forgotten how to turn back again. What will they say when you return to earth? Do you think they will recognize you, or will they shoo you out of the house and wail for Rahab?" I was dumb, frightened and bewildered. I stretched out my forefeet, hoping to find them hands, but they were still hooves, black and pointed. It was no longer fun to gallop or to snatch at succulent leaves. The girl must have seen I was frightened, for she knelt down and put her arms around my neck. "Poor little oryx, I was cruel to tease you. It is easy to be Rahab again. Do it the same way as you become an antelope. You are a man, how can you be an oryx? Think of yourself as Rahab. Rahab is a man and taller than am I." Suddenly she was looking up at me instead of kneeling beside me, and the hands on her shoulders were my hands. She drew back to point at the ground about us, patterned with narrow hoof prints. "You didn't like that game, Rahab. See, I will make it as though we had never played it." She spread out her hands, and the prints vanished, and the path by which we had come, stretching so far away to where the boat waited to carry me back from my dream, vanished as though the turf were water flowing over a sandbar. Then she took me by the hand and told me to close my eyes. When I opened them, we were standing by the doorway of a hut outside a small village. There was the sound of a woman sobbing. Out of the doorway came a man carrying a thin, flexible stick the end frayed and stained with blood. He seemed not to see us, until the girl, telling me to watch what she did, stepped forward and pulled the stick from his hand. Now she was no longer a girl, a half-head shorter than I. She was a woman more than 6 cubits tall, wearing the coarse tunic of a worker in the field. The man cringed away from her, putting up his hands as though to protect his head from a blow. She caught them in one of hers and dragged him back to the hut. It seemed as though his hands were bound together by cords. He struggled, but he could not free himself. Then she thrust them against the lintel, and they stayed there as though bound fast to the wooden bar. Calmly and dispassionately she began to flog him, and his back broke open into wheels meticulously placed from neck to thigh. He screamed like a snared animal, yet I found nothing terrible in seeing my love, who was so gentle, deliver such bitter punishment. The flogging over, she broke the rod into 7 pieces and threw them on the ground. Where they fell sprang up 7 osiers, each bearing a multiplicity of rods such as he had used. He slumped down in the doorway, staring at the 7 trees and at the woman who stood among them. Then she spoke. "You have used your strength against the woman whom in the name of the gods you made an oath to protect. Now you have learned that the goddess of women is stronger than a man. You have felt the pain that was brought by your rod, and in the name of your wife it is broken into 7 pieces, and from their planting have grown 7 trees. Look well upon them, seeing how from their branches spring many rods, and that, when one is cut, 2 grow in its place. Know also that, though I have flogged you, I am not weary, and that the rod I use never loses its power, only does it vanish when it is no longer needed. The tears of your wife will make these trees grow fast, and should she cry out because of you, then will I answer her voice as surely as an echo. Remember my 7 trees, and think well before you give way to the hunger that will be quenched by their fruit. For the lust for power makes them bitter eating. Here shall these trees remain, and only when the heart of your wife rejoices shall they go, so that in sleep you may walk unshadowed by them." I wanted to see her do another magic, but she said it was almost time for us to wake. I thought I would find myself standing in the boat, watching the dark, heavy cliffs approaching as the mist gathered to hide her from me. But she said there was still time for us to talk. For a moment she disappeared and then was again beside me. "I'm sorry I had to go away," she said. "Someone opened the shutter. The sunlight was so strong on my face and made me open my eyes, but I pulled up the cover and gone to sleep again." "How do you change yourself so easily? I think I used to know how, but I've forgotten." "Of course you did. It's only Ra-Up who is unsure of himself. I know what it feels like, knowing and yet not remembering. They are teaching me to play a harp. I get so cross when my fingers are clumsy because I know that once the strings obeyed them, though the harp I played had 4 strings instead of 5. It's such a nuisance having to learn things one used to know just because one's been born again. Still, it doesn't take nearly as long here as it does down there. Do tell me, please, quickly, before you wake up, how can I make myself tall or turn into an antelope?" "Just by thinking you are an antelope. Think yourself into an antelope now." "No, I'm not going to. You might leave me when I'd forgotten how to undo myself." "Well, make yourself twice as tall as me." "How should I know that it wasn't you making yourself shorter?" "Ra-Up, you're being very difficult. I'll practice hard so that next time we meet, I'll be as good at it as you. You'd better start on things outside yourself. I think you'll find it easier. I started that way. They used to bolt the door of my room because I went for walks by myself at night when they wanted me to stay in bed. And there were bars over the window so that I couldn't get out that way either. So I pretended there was a door in the wall which no one knew about except me, and that it would open when I told it to. It became my favorite idea when I was going to sleep. Very soon I could see a thin crack where it fitted into the wall. Then I thought about it even harder, and night by night the crack grew wider till I could walk through it. Then I thought it would be fun if if it could open into a garden instead of on the court, and the next time I went through it, it did. The water in the pool I made was warm to swim in, even though it was winter and the nights were cold. Then I used to make vines have grapes on them when I knew they were bare, and I made honeysuckle climb up the pillars of the central courtyard, and violets cover the limestone floor. I can't remember how long it was before I thought people into different shapes. I had a horrid nurse, at least she is my attendant now, but she used to be my nurse, who always pulled my hair when she was polishing it. She was so proud of her own hair that she never wore a wig. I thought her into being bald, not just shaven like a priest, but shiny as a duck's egg. At first I thought she was only a person I had invented, but when she began to wail and screech, I knew she was real. I'm nearly sure she remembered it too, though she pretended not to believe in dreams. For the next morning, I heard her repeating a spell against baldness over and over again, and her hair was all greasy with something she had rubbed into it. After that, I changed lots of people, but none of them into horrid things, unless they had been very horrid to me first. There was a little crippled boy who used to sit in the dust outside the coppersmith's to beg for food. I went to see him when he was asleep, and he was still sitting there. He thought he would always be crippled. So he was, even when he had left his body behind. I made him strong and beautiful, and being happy while he was asleep seemed to make him different even in the daytime. I wanted to bring him to live in our house, but they wouldn't let me. Then I thought of making myself different. I started with little things like the cool color of my hair or making myself look grown up when I was only 8. Then someone told me other ways of using this kind of magic. And after a time it was as easy to change what I looked like as it is to put on another tunic. I only turned into an antelope to surprise you. She broke off. You must go back to your boat. I've got to go now. And I was alone in my room at HORUS-A. The next chapter is entitled Daughter of the Hare. Have a good Saturday.